Right, I'm back with the right tool. That was not very tight. But it's not loosening up, so that's odd. What the secret is there. Normally as soon as you break the screw free, it will roll free quite easily. That one didn't want to. Let's find the best screwdriver for this job. So that one. No, this one should do it. Take the screw out here. That drives the sprocket from the shaft. And push out our sprocket shaft. The guide bush for the film advance will drop out. So should the clutch assembly. Which likewise is a bit sticky. At the base of the camera we can unhook the spring from the catch for the rewind button. Now my tools are getting covered in that thick and sticky grease and a little bit of sand that's loose in the bottom of the camera for good measure. Get this lock lever out of the way. The 3 screws hold the guide bush for the film advance shaft in place. I'm taking note of how much advance there is on that spring. That's interesting. That spring tension is what returns the film advance lever to the park position. And interestingly, on this camera it is set in much the same tension as I would use for a Retina Reflex or a Retina IIS camera, and 1/3 of a turn more than I would normally use for a Retina 3C camera. Though I certainly hadn't noticed that there was a lot of tension on the film advance shaft with this particular camera. Alright, that's our film advance shaft out, and the grease on that is very, very sticky. Ugh. So these components will need to go into the degreaser. Our sprocket doesn't need to, and our plastic take-up spool certainly doesn't go into the degreaser, but that metal bush does. The body casting's looking fairly well stripped down. The tripod mount is often loose, or the screws on the tripod mount are often loose, and yes, they are loose in this case. We'll have the tripod mount off. That can go through the cleaner as well, along with its screws. The aluminium bush usually doesn't require that treatment. That's it. That's as much as needs to be stripped out of the body. As you can probably see, there is a huge dollop of thick, dirty grease here and here. I may have to lift out this bracket just so I can pull this plastic guide out of the way just to get it cleaning those parts. Had they not been as covered in filth, I would not have to do that. The 2 screws at the base of the camera there hold this plate in position. This little arm is our rangefinder. swivel that appears to be held with a single screw at the top, so I'll undo that. Yes, it is. Very fine pivot screw. We can lift out this piece, lift out the metal baffle. This component is riveted in place and doesn't need to really come out, but it gives me access to clean out that filthy grease and before I reassemble those components. This is the rangefinder coupling at this point. That little screw at the top, I can see I've bent that slightly, so I'm going to have to straighten that up. I should probably have undone that screw before I pulled this piece out. Alright, these components to the degreaser, they'll need a good soak. The stuff I use is called Painter's Grease and Wax Remover. It's for preparing surfaces prior to painting, and it's very good at softening up dirty, filthy old grease of this nature. So that's the next task, put these away, get them soaking. I'll start cleaning up the body casting. I'm just using some naphtha cigarette lighter fluid on a cotton bud or Q-tip, and I'm making sure I clean away all traces of old grease and accumulated dust and dirt from inside the body casting. Particular attention to where the transfer shaft from the cocking rack runs across the back of the camera, or from the back of the camera to the front of the camera rather. Inside the body, typically you'll find film chips and accumulated rubbish at the base here underneath the spool. That one's relatively clean. The base of the camera, much the same deal. At this end where the film advance is, there'll be more grease and dirt there. All that grease needs to be removed. And any accumulated grit too. It's worth attacking the grease first to get all the sticky grease free from the body. When that's cleaned up, any dust that's loose can be brushed out with a paintbrush. If you try attacking the dust with a paintbrush before you've removed the grease, you will inevitably end up just spreading greasy sand and dust to every available surface, and it'll be harder to clean up. At the top of the camera, much the same deal, where the film advance shaft goes through, or the sprocket shaft goes through. Make sure you clean away all accumulated dirt and grease. This is comparatively clean as these things go. That's good. Now I'm looking at the casting. I want to get rid of this old adhesive and corrosion products and so forth from here, so I'm just going to scraping with the back of my scalpel blade, see how easily that stuff comes off. If it was corrosion, it would probably be coming off very easily. Mostly this is adhesive and it's fairly well stuck. So I will try removing that with some solvent. In this case I'm going to try that with some acetone. Now be very careful not to get any acetone near that leatherette. Otherwise it'll make a mess of it and you wish you'd never touched it. But that's dissolving that old adhesive nicely from the body at this point. Put a go. I'll wet that nicely with some acetone, let that soak in. And that should come off fairly easily. So the leatherettes either side of the front of the casting and on the base of the camera need to be treated in the same way, just to get all this rubbish off. It's much easier to stick leatherettes back and get a good finish if you remove all the old rubbish first. You can just glue your leatherettes back in place on top of the old grease, but they'll be lumpy and bumpy and they'll never look 100%. Inevitably we'll be left with some staining here. It won't come back to shiny bright metal. That's okay. Aluminium usually dulls, it usually oxidises in air. It's often got a dull finish on the surface. That's not a problem. There's a stubborn spot right here. It wasn't dissolving, and from the look of the colour of the aluminium underneath it, I'd say that was corrosion under there. And you can see a dark spot here possibly. That's definitely corrosion. As long as it's smooth, clean the lumps and bumps off it, that's not going to be a problem. That's all that surface. Just round the corner here. This bracket of course is chromed brass because and the adhesive will behave differently on that than it will on the aluminium body, and certainly it's behaving differently here. It's stuck better and is more reluctant to come off. Right, tough patch here, something hard, and it's corrosion. I can tell by the colour of that. I'm just scraping that off with the back edge of the scalpel blade. Likewise a little patch right here. I think that'll do for that side. So I'll just do this side now and the base of the camera, and then I'll have that body prepared. Well, as you can probably see, I have the body cleaned ready now for reassembly. Discoloration and patches on the camera casting there now. Just discolorations of the aluminium body. The same at the base. All the traces of the old adhesive and so forth have been removed. All traces of dust and sand and grit have been removed from the camera body. And that part of the job is done. I'll need to clean up the other components that fit inside there. Most of them of course are currently in the degreaser. The plastic baffle here and the metal baffle. The metal baffle looks clean enough as it is. I'll give that a quick wipe over. Here is where the transfer shaft runs through that baffle, and here there's a huge blob of grease where that drum for the cable runs across that, so I've got to clean this plastic component. Now most likely this will be unaffected by naphtha, but I'm checking fairly closely to make sure that that's the case. It appears that that is the case, and I can use naphtha on a cotton bud to wipe away that old filthy grease. Be very cautious when cleaning any plastics using some sort of solvent, because frequently you'll discover that the plastic doesn't appreciate it and goes soft and gooey, or at the very least becomes marked and hazy in finish. That's good. Now this piece here, that's terrible. That is nasty. Ugh. Getting it all over my hands. That grease has gone very hard and waxy. That looks good. I'll wipe around the inside with a fresh cotton bud and solvent just to remove any marks in there, since the matte black paint goes shiny if it's got grease and stuff on it. Of course we don't want it to be shiny. That's cleaned up well enough, that's good. Had that matte black paint not cleaned up well, I probably would have just chosen to spray the inside of that with some matte black spray paint, which would have improved it no end. And this metal baffle is perfectly clean, that's fine, that can go back in the body. Alright, so I have that body components sorted out. I'll just do the film take-up spool. Again, I'm using a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud, and I'm watching carefully to make sure that that plastic doesn't dislike it. Most of those spools are good. I have seen cases where they don't appreciate the solvent. It's a bit hard to predict which ones are going to cause problems and which ones are not. Good. So far so good. And I think my next task will be to look at the state of the shutter, I think. I'm just looking at this top cover. It looks reasonably tidy. The outside surface, I can see tiny bubbles of corrosion underneath the chrome. That's mostly down between where the chrome casing here would be fitting down on the top of the body in that chrome trim. So moisture has got down in there and some corrosion is set up. On the inside surface here, around the windows, the viewfinder windows, I can see corrosion products here. So I've got to pull those glasses out to clean them. I can see a spot of rust at this point. So it suggests to me that the camera has been splashed at some stage and moisture has hit those windows and run inside. But apart from that, it looks in quite good order. It's quite a good example. It's always worth remembering that things like this are 60 years old or thereabouts, and they've stood the test of time pretty well. Looking at this plastic window here at the top, I can see now that it's slightly displaced. It's been pushed in at the back edge. I was complimenting it on having survived unscathed for 60 years. It doesn't appear to be quite the case. I will warm this up with a hairdryer so that the plastic is less brittle and push that back into place, or attempt to push it back into place, and hopefully that'll all go well. I have the body components all cleaned up now. The mechanical components are still in the degreaser and will be for some time to come, but I can start working on the shutter, which needs to be serviced. So I'm looking closely at this to see how it is that I get in, and I'm pretty confident that in this camera I have to unscrew the name ring, and it should expose 3 screws which hold the focus scale ring to the front group. And once those screws are loose, I should be able to unscrew the front group and lift it out of the camera. So I suppose I better find the tool for this. I may be able to use a friction tool, I may not. Right, will this friction tool do it? Yes, it does. That's good. The fact that the friction tool spun that name ring loose probably points to it having been loosened by a previous repairer. That sound was just the shutter releasing. It must have been cocked. And I must have hit the shutter release on the table. I'll just take that pin out. That pin at the back that you see there, that's the rangefinder coupling pin. I'll take that out now before I manage to lose it. Pop that to one side. Okay, let's see if I can get this name ring off the front. It's loose, but it feels very rough in the threads. There may be a bit of grit in there. I'll put a little drop of naphtha on that, and I'll try it with the friction tool. That might be allowing me to spin that off. It does. So I'm looking to start, yeah, just a bit of grit in there, bit of grit. It's a little bit rough. That's all that was holding that. And am I correct? Yes, there are 3 small screws visible. I think if I slacken those 3 screws up, which will clamp the focus scale ring to the front group, it should mean I can rotate the front group independently of the focus scale ring and unscrew it completely from the mount. Is that going to work? No, it doesn't appear to. So let's loosen those 3 screws up completely, lift the scale ring off, well, it doesn't want to lift off, must be stuck. Now those little screws are very tiny. I'm going to carefully lift those off and place them to one side before I lose them completely. Right, I'm able to rotate that completely. The stop was on the back plate that those 3 screws went through to. So by removing those screws, I was able to unscrew the whole front group. The front group looks to be, I'm looking to see how it's held in here. The central cone here may hold 3 screws, I think. Looking at this from the rear, I can see 3 screws visible there. Most likely that cone piece in the middle would unscrew with a friction tool. See if we can get that loose and expose those 3 screws. It's a bit reluctant to shift. It's coming slowly. There it is. There are the 3 screws. So if I'd removed those 3 screws, I could have unscrewed that whole front lens group. That's alright, I'll probably put it back together that way. The main thing is that we are in. So looking at it from here, this front section with the depth of field pointers, which are coupled to the aperture ring, this section comes off as a piece. It's held in with this front lens group. This front lens group is screwed into the mount. So a tool for that would be a handy thing. This should do the job. So let's just see if we can unscrew that front group. No, I don't quite like the fit of that. I'll take it all the way out to there. That is extremely tight. I'll use another tool to break that lens free. That lens has been screwed in there, but somebody has done it up extra tight. That's a new. Well, the secrets of success here was to put the broader, heavier tips on this tool, and it did in fact break that lens free. It's not exactly smooth in coming out. It's almost as if there was some corrosion or something. It's got a very dry feel to those threads. You can probably hear that squeaking sound. The grease is quite dirty looking and waxy. That lens is free. Will it come out? Right, so there's our centre group. Pop that to one side, and we've got the shutter assembly. We have our locking screw here, much as you would have on a Retina 3C or similar camera. If I unscrew that retaining ring, tip the retaining ring out. This front lens, this group assembly here, this group here should come off in one piece, and it does. Now this controls the action of the depth of field pointers. It's quite stiff and dirty, gritty feeling. That couples back through to the aperture scale ring at the back here. Here we've got a little ball bearing. That forms the detent for the shutter speeds, and it acts on the ring here, the speed control ring. So here is our shutter speed setting ring. The aperture ring may or may not come off at this point. No, it doesn't. The intermediate ring, to take off that speed cam ring. Will this intermediate ring come off? No, that comes off from the rear of the shutter. Alright, so we've got our front control rings off. From the back of the shutter, what have we got? 3 screws here. I'm looking to make sure I get the right ones, I suppose. We have a central retaining ring here which holds the shutter into the mount. I think that should be the one to approach first, so I will find the appropriate spanner and we'll get that loose.